Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is the worm bin that we're going to be checking in on today. It's a bin with some red wigglers in it. It's a 123-day-old system that we last checked in on 12 days ago, so I believe we're probably ready for another feeding in here. The one thing that we've been doing in here, a little bit different from the rest, I usually freeze all the stuff that I feed to all my worm bins, but in that system, the first three feedings, those were my typical fare, the frozen stuff that I believe breaks down a little bit more quickly by having been frozen first, but for whatever reason, we transitioned to no frozen foods in that one. Every other system, pretty much everywhere in my worm farming collection, gets frozen foods, but there we decided we're going to feed only non-frozen foods. I started thinking to myself, well, what do I have on hand that's not frozen? And then I thought to myself, duh, it's already out on the bench, down in the wormery, because I was down here yesterday hacking up a pumpkin, getting out the seeds, etc. so on. So it's just a matter of grabbing my little pocket knife and carving off a little bit of that pumpkin, and that's going to be their non-frozen meal today. And, well, on top of that, another typical food item is the coffee that they're going to get. So a little bit of coffee on the side as well. So I'm going to get a glove on. We're going to switch places here, get the bin out on the bench, and we're going to get them fed. Here we go. What do you think? Nice little meal of not frozen pumpkin and a day's worth of coffee. And, oh boy, look at all those springtails. It's like if it were snowing. Well, it is what it is, I guess. I think somebody at one point made the suggestion that if you tailor the diet to be less of a fungal microbe dominant system, but more of like a bacteria, kind of the types of bacteria that come out of the worm's gut and stuff like that, that really make the vermicompost what it is, then you see a reduction of the springtails, because they are kind of like after the fungal growth or whatever. So whatever, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling because I really don't know anything beyond that. I'm just repeating words. But I do wonder if that could be part of the hidden key to getting rid of some of the springtails that occupy some of my systems, because sometimes it does feel to me like we got more of them in here than we need. So whatever, on to feeding the wormies. I saw no newspaper. I mean, not that's exaggerating. I did see some, but I put it aside so we could talk about exactly how much of it is that remained. Not a whole lot. So clearly the plastic on that cardboard covering that we had is keeping the system's moisture down underneath itself, creating a nice damp zone where the worms are coming up to hang out, and at the same time they're nibbling away there on the top coatings of newspaper. And maybe there was a feeding zone out here too, feeding zone indicator that is, but we had no visual sign of it. Basically, I'll typically put a coffee filter out above where we last fed. In the last feeding, it was down the middle. And that's kind of the routine in most of my systems. Unless I'm trying to migrate the worms, in which case maybe the edge of the bin is where I'm feeding and trying to get the worms to exit their castings. But in most of my everyday production systems, I'm just placing their foods right down the middle. Some of these longer, really fibrous, stringy objects, those were the stem of Brussels sprout. And here's even an example of some of the stuff that came in a little bit later. And that kind of explains why it doesn't have quite that degree of breakdown yet. This one's actually quite hard. Doesn't want to give. I can see this end of it though is starting to soften up. But it's probably best that it didn't want to crack, because when it does, the inside of the stalk has this really stinky, gooey stuff in it. But it all gets broken down. I can't even break it right now, but eventually it'll become soft, strandy, fibrous stuff like you see right there. It does feel like the material wants to crumble pretty readily, although maybe not so much. It is a little bit clumpy and sticky. And if we didn't have such thorough coverings the way we do with that plastic coated cardboard, we might see a little bit more moisture loss to evaporation, but here it seems like we're managing to retain a good amount of the moisture that goes in with the foods. I really don't recall offhand. Do you know what it was? It was kind of a moisture laden food we gave them last time. It just occurred to me what we gave them last time, but it wasn't much. It was a little bit of a cucumber, a spoiled cucumber, perhaps half of a spoiled cucumber, which is a pretty juicy vegetable, so it would have brought with it a little bit of moisture content, but I think in the long run not a whole lot really. This goes way back now. This is a gourd. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to occasionally just chip off a little bit of the material just to see if we can ever peek inside of it. Maybe if I had a little probe that we can pick out the inside with, maybe we could look to see what's going on there. This one is still kind of tubular, hasn't really been broken apart as much. Oh, maybe it has. Here we go. Interesting how they like to be down inside of it. Alright, I think we've pretty much excavated all the different old foods that we've encountered along the way. Oh yeah, wow, okay. Are we finally starting to see the cabbage get eaten? That took a long time. Now I'm reminded of the fact that we would keep coming back into the system and keep reminding ourselves that perhaps not freezing the foods, especially in the case of the cabbage, might have been you know, an unwise choice. Here we go. Now we're starting to bump into some of this cabbage that's just been in here forever. But there was quite a bit of it, making me wonder, did we just miss certain sections of the bin and not encounter those other large chunks of cabbage? I guess just like the cabbage curiosity is making me want to excavate a little bit more around the section we cut down through to see if perhaps we'll bump into a few more leftovers here and there. Maybe a little additional chunk of cabbage over here, or maybe not. This actually looks like it could just be the shell of a avocado, so perhaps the cabbage is finally getting broken down. I found this pretty large piece of the purple cabbage and a little bit of the white, green, whatever cabbage. But there were really large chunks of that stuff in here. And I'm just wondering where they could have vanished to, because I didn't see any sign of them, except for these two leftover bits, and they're pretty big, and that's part of the reason I thought we'd find something a little bit larger. So whatever, you know, I think it's time to bring an end to our search for leftovers and give them their assigned feeding for today, this yummy portion of pumpkin and coffee. So we've opened up a pretty good sized hole here, and you know, we've got this old piece of newspaper here, and I could always go grab more, go grab another chunk to lay out on top, because this one was clearly popular. But I think as a supplement to their bedding, to go in with today's feeding, we're going to turn to my prepared bedding mix, which is running a little bit low, but I think we could spare just enough to provide this feeding with a little foundation of nice bedding for them to hang out in. We can even spice up the bedding to make it a little bit more interesting by sprinkling in some of my worm chow, to which we can include today's portion of yummy coffee. I guess that's the other bonus of giving a day's worth of coffee here, is that they get to hang on to this coffee filter, which kind of also goes in as a top covering piece of paper, sort of like the newspaper that we found a few little traces of. But I guess to me the coffee filters are just feeding zone indicators. Let's give them a little bit of grit too. This here is the pulverized eggshell that I use as grit. And last but not least, the star of the show, these nice large chunks of not frozen pumpkin, freshly carved off the pumpkin. And in addition to the newly added yummy foods, which I don't think are going to last quite as much as some of these other things that have gone in here. I've got a funny feeling these other old bits of leftover stuff are just going to continue to show up over and over again. The one thing I know is in here too, novelty item, which has been going for years and years at this point, is a cork, which we usually try to position down in the middle of the system so that it's almost certain that we'll bump into it along the way, but I didn't really notice it. Perhaps we just breezed by it. Perhaps we'll still bump into it before we're finished here today. But I generally don't want to go off on wild goose chases looking for something that I know is there, probably right under my nose, but is eluding me. Sometimes things elude me for quite some time. Look at all the wormies hanging out over here. Yeah, that's fun. And let's level off with some of this material over here. Good number of worms hanging out in this stuff as well. Now I'm kind of actively feeling to see if I can bump into the cork, but I don't sense it anywhere. But it'll always come out in the wash. At some point in the future, we're starting to bump into it. Even making me question now, is this a system with the cork in it? I'm fairly certain that it is. So let's mark where we last fed using this, a feeding zone indicator, and I think I'd like to get some sort of a top covering paper on here. So let me go fetch something and we'll be finished. Here we go, nice little sheet of newspaper to go out on top, just because it does seem to me that as the moisture recirculates beneath the plastic that coats this piece of cardboard, it creates a nice little moisture haven that the worms really do enjoy hanging out in. And usually while they're there, they like to take a little bite out of the carbon-rich paper products nearby. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.